Hi, my name is Ashley, and I'm a grateful believer in Christ who struggles with a deep-seated fear of rejection that manifests itself in addictions to toxic relationships and a host of other self-esteem and self-image issues. I grew up in a very loving Christian home. So often you hear stories about families that are one way at church and another at home. Well, this is not one of those stories. In my house, we were church perfect all the time. At least that was my childish perception of things. I learned at a very young age that perfection, or as close as you could get to it, equaled love and attention, and I strive for this perfection. Some of my earliest memories are of church and being at church. I can remember about 6 years old during a vacation Bible school feeling that I had to pray this prayer because everyone else was saying it. Many of my peers were doing it, so I figured, why not? I remember thinking if I didn't pray this prayer, I wouldn't get to go to heaven with my family, so it was something I had to do. My parents were very excited when I told them. Fast forward a few years, and I'm about 8 or 9. While attending a church camp, there was a particularly emotional service, and I was crying and very upset. I was told these feelings I was having were conviction and that I needed to say a prayer. So again, I prayed a prayer. Done, right? It must be real this time. I can remember I didn't want to tell anybody because it didn't matter. They all thought I was already saved, so why not let them continue to think that? I didn't even tell my parents, but my group leader did. They were happy and talked a lot about baptism this time around. I figured that's what you're supposed to do, so that's what I did. In my mind, I was covered, but I never had any real desire to grow, never really felt or experienced Christ. I heard people, especially family, talk about that, but I chalked my lack of desire up to just being a kid. Right about this time, I got caught in the crosshairs of some girls at my school. I was slightly overweight with a bigger build and dressed like the church kid. We all know how children can be, and this was no exception. The girls completely broke me down and destroyed my sense of self-worth and my self-image. I begged and pleaded with my parents to homeschool me. They finally agreed, and I learned my first real lesson in life: avoidance. When things got too hard or too tough, just run away. Don't deal with it. Within the next year or so after homeschooling, I discovered the most wonderful thing that most girls at that age discover: boys. I was obsessed from the start. One in particular showed me attention back, and I learned that suddenly I felt good about myself again. I was slowly starting to rebuild my self-image. That was until he stopped liking me. All of that so-called worth that I had built up took a drastic nosedive. This cycle continued well into my teenage years. My parents, being the strong Christians they were, did not approve of this intense interest in boys, so I began to learn something else new: lying. And you know what? I'd finally found something I was good at, or so I thought. Sure, sometimes my parents would catch me, but not all the time. I got a thrill from seeing what I could get them to believe. It began to spill over from my parents to my siblings and eventually my friends. I would lie about anything and everything. At about 16, though, I met a guy that was unlike any of the other guys I'd ever liked or hung out with. He was kind and sweet. He was a bit older than me, but he was a Christian man and very respectful. We were pretty much inseparable when at church. At this time, it was nothing more than a friendship because of the 4-year age difference between us, but he used to jokingly tell me all the time, "Girl, I'm going to marry you." He talked a lot about praying where God would take us in life as we got older. He was one of the few people I never played my lying game with. One Sunday, shortly after I turned 17, he confided in me that he wanted to talk to my dad about starting an old school courtship and to ask my father permission to come and visit me at my home with my parents there. I was beyond thrilled. Unfortunately, he never got the chance to speak with my dad. The spring break after I turned 17, Carrie was killed in a car accident on the way home from a men's retreat with our church. But see, due to my lying nature and the fact that I was worried about what my parents would think about his age, I never told them about my true feelings for him, nor his for me. They knew we were close friends, but they were unaware of anything outside of that. Because of this, I felt like I was not able to truly and properly mourn. I was devastated. Now, on top of my self-esteem issues, I learned self-loathing and anger. Self-loathing over the fact that because I'd hid my feelings for Carrie, I could not openly grieve him over what had happened. And anger over God for taking him away from me. I poured myself quickly into one relationship after another with more lying to hide them. Then, the spring break after I turned 18, all the lies about boys and relationships was forced into light. I was pregnant. It devastated my godly church-going family. Talk about self-loathing. I hit an all-time low at this point. The one and only bright spot in all of this was my beautiful baby girl. I look back now at my life at that point, and I know God was working even when I did not know it or see it. In my daughter, I found a love I did not know I was capable of, and I thank God daily for the blessing she continues to be in my life. While pregnant and after I had my baby, I stayed in church, but this time I learned a new life lesson: judgment. Yes, even amongst the Christians. Oh, there were plenty that loved me unconditionally, but as the saying goes, one bad apple. In my hurt and my shame, I convinced myself that they were all judging me. So what did I do? I started lying even more. I was trying my best to convince them that I was better. I had changed, but I was still running around doing the same things as before. A little more than a year goes by, and again my lying catches up to me. I find out I'm pregnant for a second time, and this time by a much older, married man. My parents encouraged me to pray about adoption, so I genuinely do pray about it. They keep telling me they feel like this is what God is telling them I should do. So after another emotional church service, remember how I am with those, I lied to myself for the first time. I convinced myself that God was telling me this is what I should do. I mean, he told my parents, that's what he's telling me too. Adoption it was. We found a nice, loving home, and I handed over my beautiful little boy to someone else's arms. I just thought I had known this depths of self-hatred before. There were no words to describe my hurt or level of hatred for myself. I do want to take a moment here, though, and say that knowing what I know now, if I could change this part of my story, I would not. I do believe that adoption was God ordained, and I can look back and see his hand in that. I am proud that I was able to provide a son for a Christian couple that prayed so desperately for a child. And I do know that someday God will build a relationship between me and my son. After the adoption, though, I was on a mission. I wanted out, away from the only home I'd ever known, far away. Remember, I avoided hard things at all costs. I met someone online that lived in Houston, Texas, and came from family money. He was my ticket out. He loved me and could provide a good life for me and my little one. So I thought. We were married, and I was leaving, and nothing could stop me. Less than a month into our marriage, I found myself pregnant again. I was over the moon. I had finally done things the right way. I was 6 weeks in and already counting the days till I got to meet my baby and my family would be complete. At about 4 months in, however, my marriage starts falling apart. I vividly remember one night him pulling a knife and putting it to his throat and saying, "It's me or you, and I wouldn't survive jail anyways." My daughter saw all this, and so much more happened. So now all the fear and guilt and self-hatred is built into my parenting, as well as all the other areas they were invading in my life. After that marriage ended, I truly did convince myself I was going to change. Growing up as I did, I knew the best way to change was to get into God's Word, so this is what I did. I was reading the Bible every day, but again, never really experiencing God, never really having a desire to experience God. So after a while, I just tapered off and then stopped altogether. Right around this time, I had my third baby and my second daughter. Even in my rebellion, God had blessed me yet again. I was in love all over again. I did well for a while, but as before, all those negative emotions started pouring into my life again. Shortly after having my third child, I discovered partying as a way of dulling the pain of the emotions I was constantly experiencing. One night during a particularly crazy party, the maintenance man at my apartment, that was a very godly man and had been friends with my family for years now, called them and told them what was going on every night with my girls in the other room. Again, caught up in my lies, my parents came and took my kids. After a few days, I convinced my parents that I would do anything to change. So I moved out of my apartment and in with them. But shortly after that, I got in touch with some of my old friends from Houston. The next thing I know, I'm packing up and moving back to Houston. I left my kids with my parents, or at least until I got settled in and could provide a place for them. During this time, my parents convinced me to give them guardianship of the girls. What if we need to take them to the doctor? What if something major happens and you're not here? If you do this, they can be on your insurance and not have state insurance. These were all things my parents and their lawyer told me. It sounded legitimate and made sense, so I agreed to it. You'll see in a moment why this part of my story is relevant. After months of being away, I start desperately missing my girls, so again I beg my parents to let me move back into their home, again promising to change. And honestly, I do really well for a while, but as always, those old feelings of being judged, coupled with my own self-hatred ways, I start slowly falling back. I start searching for a new relationship, and I found one. No, he wasn't a Christian like my parents wanted, but he said he loved me and he seemed to be good to my kids. We marry, and as before, things start to quickly unravel. Eventually, I realize I cannot keep my kids in the situation I'm in any longer, no matter how depressing another divorce might be. So now here I am, barely out of my 20s, 2 failed marriages, having given birth to 3 children but only raising 2, and feeling completely and utterly alone. So again, this time I turn back to what I know, church. I throw myself all in this time. I'm saying all the prayers, at least while I'm at church. I'm leading groups, basically being the perfect church servant. But at home, I'm in just as much despair and hurting as always. Then someone came into my life that I thought was everything I needed. They gave me everything I've been craving my whole life. They loved me and showered me with affection and did everything to help me overcome my insecurities. There was just one problem. This person was female. Growing up in church, this was the ultimate no-no. This was the big bad sin, but I did not care. I dove in head first, straight into a homosexual relationship. I knew from the second it started it was wrong, and I did not care. Now remember all that lying I thought I was so good at? For the first time, I was forcing it upon my kids. No one could know about my relationship or they'd be taken away. So they lied for me. That is, until one day the lying got to be too much, and my very courageous 13-year-old told my family everything. My parents came and took my kids. This is where the guardianship comes into play. Those papers I had signed so long ago gave my parents the right to come and take my kids at any time that they thought the kids were in danger without having to go through the court system. And they were not having their grandchildren around homosexuality. So they took my kids for what I thought was for good this time. This was the 3rd time I found myself alone and without my kids. I was done. I was over it all. And on August 2nd, 2015, I attempted to end my life. Through all of this, I'm still convinced I'm saved, so if I'm going to heaven no matter what, why not just get it over with? Again, God in His infinite mercy rescued me from myself. God allowed a friend of mine to find out what I was doing, and they were able to get to me before it was too late. My friend stayed with me for 3 days, literally just holding me to keep me from doing harm to myself until they finally had to go back to work. At this point, I knew I needed real change, not the fake change I'd always gone through in my life, or I was not going to survive. The day after my friend left, I reached out via Facebook to an old acquaintance at the church I grew up in. I vaguely remembered her posting some years back about a recovery group. I told her I didn't know anything about it, or if the church even still did anything like that, but if so, could it help me? She said yes, there was something at the church that she thought would help. She didn't go into details, but asked me to promise her I would meet her there Friday night. This was on a Tuesday. I do not remember much about those days leading up to that Friday. All I remember is being curled up on my couch, marking time. I do not remember eating, drinking, or even getting up for the restroom. Friday rolled around, and I talked myself up off the couch. I got there a little early for the 6 o'clock start time, but I froze. I think I finally made it through the door about 6:30. I can remember thinking that if no one talks to me other than Laura, the lady I had reached out to, then I was going to follow through on my decision to end my life. Again, God in His infinite mercy did send someone to talk to me, a very sweet lady and her husband. They sat with me, and she held my hand through the entire large group time, telling me God loved me, and so did she. I remember thinking this lady is crazy, she doesn't even know me, but her touch kept me there until the end. I didn't get a chance to talk to Laura until after the meetings because of being late, but I finally got to talk to her and she asked me what was going on. I tell her, pridefully, almost daring her to reject me or judge me, that I'm dating a girl and my parents stole my kids because of it. Not only did she not judge me, but she hugged me. She told me she loved me and that she was giving her testimony in 2 weeks and made me promise her that I would be there to see that. So I committed to coming for the next 2 Fridays. That Wednesday, my grandmother wound up going in the hospital, and my mom was unable to make the 7-hour trip to go with her, so I went. She was discharged on Friday, so I headed back home with no intention of going to the church that night. I was exhausted and smelled like a hospital and just wanted to shower and sleep. To this day, I cannot explain it from the interstate making the decision not to go, but I don't remember anything. I don't even remember getting off the exit, but somehow I found myself in the parking lot of the church where the meetings were held. I tell myself, I'll just go in for this Friday since I promised my friend, but I make the decision that no matter what, after listening to her testimony, I was going to end my life. So again, I go home, I curl up on my couch, and I mark time until the next Friday. I go back the next Friday, and from the moment my friend starts talking, I knew something was off. My chest hurt, and I mean hurt bad. I literally felt like I had a bomb in my chest. I kept thinking, I'm not going to have to kill myself because I'm about to have a heart attack. Afterwards, I start talking with my friend, more her talking, me listening, because I still have this extreme uncomfortableness growing in my chest. During our conversation, kind of out of the blue, she asked me if I'm a Christian. I look at her like she has two heads. Of course I'm a Christian. I grew up in church, I said the prayers, I did the baptism, I was good. She looked at me again and asked me the same question. This time I falter and begin to wonder. She asked me a third time. I tell her, in the most honest moment I'd had since a small child, I honestly have no clue where I'm going when I die. So we talked back and forth a little bit with this feeling in my chest growing more and more intense. Finally, she asked me if I was ready to give my heart completely and totally to Christ, to completely surrender to God's will for my life, not just surface change. In that moment, I heard God speak to me audibly, and I knew this is exactly what I needed. It was now or never. So I pray, and I pour out everything to God right there in front of my friend. I let out 30 years of hurt and pain, and I asked Jesus to come into my life. And it is like that bomb in my chest did explode, but instead of killing me, it gave me life and passion and purpose. I literally felt God invade every fiber and facet of my being. I'm not saying I've not picked up that hurt and pain from time to time, but I do know that Christ is in my life and I don't have to carry that pain with me anymore. When I do pick it up, I can lay it right back at His feet. After that, I made a commitment to God to actively follow Him wherever He would lead me. Little did I know that in less than 30 days, He would lead me away from the only home I'd ever known to follow where my parents had taken my kids. But He did, and I followed. The very first Sunday I moved, before I ever even had the U-Haul unloaded, I went to this little church my oldest daughter had been attending with some of her new friends she had made at school. I knew instantly this church was exactly where God wanted me to be. This is why He had brought me here. They even had a CR group that met right there at the church. I would like to say everything became perfect from then on, but unfortunately that was not the case. While we were not in a relationship anymore, I did have some occasional contact with my ex-girlfriend. Just a late night phone call every now and then. Talking on the phone never hurt anyone, right? And I still had that deep-seated fear of rejection and needed to be loved, rearing its ugly head every now and then. Back when I was saved in August, my friend had challenged me to read the book of John for the first 30 days, which I did. At that time, God spoke to my heart and gave me the verse John 4:39 as my life verse, and many came to know Him because of her story. So in February 2016, I made the decision to cut all ties with my ex and fully commit my life to the verse and vision God had given me. Since that time, God has provided a way for me to go back to school to get a degree in ministry. He has given me a heart for ministry, especially in the areas of young teens that are hurting concerning sex and pregnancy. He has given me a heart for those who are hurting and considering suicide as a way out, and a desire to bring this problem so many face out into the light. God has also given me people in my life that constantly show me true, God-like, unconditional love. I clearly see His hand in His work in all relationships within my family that was damaged over the years due to my lying and sneaking around. My life is far from perfect, but since giving my heart and life to God, I'm learning that instead of hating myself when I stumble and fall, I have God and the amazing mentors and accountability partners He has placed in my life to lift me up and love me through it. Thank you for listening to my story turned His story.